All right. What's going on? And welcome to the third episode of Studio Time. I'm your host, Jay Stew, and here is my wonderful co-host with me, Mr. Justin Speck. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Not a whole lot, man. I'm excited about this episode. Ready to talk about some movie villains.
Oh yeah. I'm definitely excited about this episode. This was one that you suggested. It was a natural, logical step because last week we talked about the hero's journey and protagonist and what makes a great hero and a compelling story. And this week we are talking about what makes a great villain. So I'm definitely excited to hop into this episode. But really quick, if you're joining us for the live stream, go ahead and slap that like button and feel free to hop in the chat and commentate, talk to us, do whatever, man. Make this episode interesting. So we're gonna have some fun tonight. But without any further delay, we are going to get right into tonight's topic, which is what makes great villains. And I wanted to start off with some words from author Jerry Jenkins. I was listening to him earlier today and reading some things about him, and he was talking about what to him what makes a great villain, and he says that a melodramatic villain is a cliche by definition, predictable, unrealistic, and they're just for fun. Creating a villain requires subtlety, and he must bear realistic, genuine motivation. Villains don't think that they are the villain. They believe their actions are justified. They have reasons for what they do, and sometimes those reasons are even good. That doesn't mean they're right, but they believe they are. So basically, he's placing emphasis on complexity and likability. I don't really like that word likability, but we'll get into that the further we get along into the episode. But what stood out to me was that he placed so much emphasis on complexity and nuance, and those are the types of villains that I like. He did go on to what's the word I'm looking for? Describe different villains. He said, there are pity villains and villains who again believe that they're doing the right thing. Some villains know that they're doing the right thing, others don't. But again, what was interesting to me is that he placed so much emphasis on complexity and nuance and likability. What about you, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with I watched that video that you sent me from Jerry Jenkins, and I pretty much agreed with everything he said. I do agree with you that there's maybe a little bit of disagreement perhaps with the term likability. I don't think every villain has to necessarily be likable, although when they are very complex and when they do have that nuance, even though they are evil, you can't help but love to watch them.
Right.
And so maybe that's kind of where that likability probably kind of comes in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, when I think of great villains, a lot of times I do think of villains who, who's their whole plan or their whole objective or goal, like you can kind of understand what they're doing. Now you don't agree with it, but like you kind of get it, And so
Yeah.
I think
you see the logic.
Right. And so I think those are the really interesting villains, the ones that that have that kind of real motivation and who don't, like you said, don't see themselves as a villain. They don't really, think that what they're doing is necessarily wrong. It's, they have kind of that inflated kind of sense of superiority that makes them think I'm the only one who can do this, or type of thing.
Right.
I think those are some pretty great villains.
No, I definitely agree. I think when he is referring to likability, I liken it to empathy or relatability, not necessarily someone that we uh that we think is a good person, although some villains can be good, good people. For the most part, they're just doing the wrong thing because
Right.
they feel their actions are justified.
Right.
But again, I think he is referring to relatability and empathy, someone who we can feel for and at least identify with in some form or fashion, if not in the entirety.
Right.
um Tragic villains make for the best empathetic and relatable villains. For example, one of the greatest cinematic villains ever created, Darth Vader. Um, the thing about Darth Vader is that he was already, a really great villain. He didn't really become the empathetic villain until like later in the sequels, and the prequels,
Right.
because now we were seeing his backstory and why he was the way he was, and how he grew up, and how he went from young Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader. And I always thought that the further we got along in or the further we went back into Darth Vader's arc, the more interesting he became. So by the time he became Darth Vader and went fully into the dark side, we had earned that. We had been on that journey with him. We
Right.
saw his highs and his lows. We saw his gains and his losses, and why he felt he needed to go to the dark side. So what do you think about Darth Vader and empathetic villains?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Darth Vader probably wasn't that empathetic of a villain until the prequels came out.
Mhm,
Especially the first film, because you don't know much about Darth Vader. But
mhm.
which that kind of makes him scarier, since he is just this imposing, kind of mysterious, who's under the helmet type of character. And
Right.
then, of course, in Empire, you find out he's Luke's father,
Mhm.
and that kind of ends that movie on a mystery, because you're like, is that true? And then we find out a little bit more about his backstory in Return of the Jedi, but we don't really learn about everything until the prequels. And you're
Right.
right, then he does become somewhat of a sympathetic villain. It's interesting to kind of try to watch those movies from episode 1 through episode 6, and Darth Vader is almost a different character, even though there's nothing different about him in the original movies.
Right.
You're just seeing him differently
Yeah,
because of
you're seeing it
yeah,
from a different perspective. Yeah.
right. So I do find that really interesting, and I do think Darth, I was doing a little research before this episode. I was looking up movie villains for our upcoming draft time, and every list I looked at, every single list, Darth Vader was number one. Greatest movie villain of all time, pretty much. I mean, and you can't. It's hard to disagree. He is an excellent villain.
It is. It is. It is. I think the thing that makes him interesting for me is his the tragedy that he experienced when he was a little boy, when he was younger, um and how he wasn't always uh a bad guy. He didn't always do these despicable things. He was enticed by
Right.
the dark side, and the dark side um played on his vulnerability. Like he's one of the most vulnerable villains ever. Because like you said, the prequels kind of made him almost a different villain, because we saw him in a different perspective. And what I find interesting about that is he he's very he's very impulsive, and they show
Mm.
that in the prequels. He's impulsive, and he is very, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm drawing a blank here. He's a hothead.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Well,
he's
yeah.
he's a hothead, and even Obi-Wan says that. I believe it was in the Obi-Wan series. Um, or maybe he didn't say it. Maybe I'm misremembering it. But um, anyway, he basically, even though Darth Vader, um, or Anakin, whatever you want to call him, even though he's so powerful, um, he'll never be able to beat uh Obi-Wan unless he surrendered in A New Hope.
Hmm.
So and that was because he was uh he was so impulsive and so hot-headed that he never really thought straight, especially when it came to fighting Obi-Wan, because that was his mentor, and their relationship is so complex. So the that is his downfall. And I think what makes a great villain is when they have not only empathy and relatability, but a character flaw that we can also relate to. And for Darth Vader, it was his hot-headedness.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it was, and we see that a lot in the prequels too with Anakin. He's always jumping into the action, and Obi-Wan's constantly going, "Anakin, no," and
Right.
so his fight with Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones, and he ends up losing a hand in that
Hmm.
fight because he jumped into it without really thinking. He was because of his hot-headedness.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's that's another thing about villains that I think is really interesting when they do have kind of that character flaw, especially if it's a character flaw that we can relate to.
Hmm.
And you're absolutely right. His impulsiveness is his biggest kind of um flaw, especially in the prequels, I think.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I definitely agree. And I like I said, I think that's the thing that um makes a great villain even greater, because
Yeah.
he was already an awesome villain. But
Right.
the prequels, as many flaws as they have,
Yeah.
um for the most part, in the entirety of the prequel, I believe they handled George Lucas handled Anakin Skywalker with care. I just, I wish he could have done that with the rest of the movie, but excuse me. But
Right.
um another another great type of villain is that of the downward spiral of uh the villain's mental state.
The descent
And
into madness kind of type thing.
yes, the descent into madness. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And this next villain is from one of my favorite movies. This movie is in my top 10 of all time, and that is The Shining. And that villain is Mr. Jack Torrance, played by the legendary Jack Nicholson. This is one of the best villains, because like we said, the descent into madness, and um the subversion that Stanley Kubrick used in The Shining. How we thought he was sane and going insane, but then we realized he's always been uh or not, maybe not always, but for at least for a long time before the events of the movie happened, before the start of the movie, he had been losing his mind and descending into madness, which I thought was a fantastic fantastic twist. Even though the clues are there,
Right.
um, I still think it was subversion at its finest. And Jack Nicholson just brings so much menace to the performance, and just incredibly nuanced for someone who is who tends to play his characters a bit over the top,
Right.
but again, that character was so well written, both in the novel and in the movie. Even though the movie is quite different from the novel, um, it's still, very, very well written. And I think the thing that's interesting about Jack Torrance again is the subversion and the nuance, and how we see the little subtle details in his descent into madness. And the further we go along, the more um the deeper he goes into that insanity,
Hmm.
we kind of see the real person that he is. And he's been putting on this facade for quite some time. And now that I'm thinking about it, it doesn't even seem like a descent into madness. It just seems like a discovery, an
Right.
uncovering, a revelation of the true Jack Torrance.
Yeah. So I agree with you. It's an amazing movie. It's an amazing performance, and he's an amazing villain. And it's no secret that Stephen King is not a fan of this movie. Which is crazy. I think, he can't be objective, obviously. It's an adaptation of his work. And one of the complaints he had was the casting of Jack Nicholson. I think in his novel, it is supposed to be kind of a descent into madness. He is supposed to be a fairly good guy in the beginning who goes bad.
Hmm.
And you were talking about how Jack Nicholson can be very over the top. That's one of the things Stephen King doesn't like about him, is he thinks his performance is too over the top, which I disagree with. I think his performance in The Shining is unbelievable. Um,
Agreed.
but yeah, Stephen King, I guess, just thought that Jack Nicholson didn't have kind of that everyman quality, I suppose, and that Jack, I guess, was supposed to have in the beginning, and then goes crazy. He thinks, and I think Stephen King also didn't really care for that whole, he's kind of been crazy the whole time and now discovering it, like you said, rather than that
Hmm.
actual descent.
Hmm.
Um, but I think Stanley Kubrick, I love the book The Shining, but I love the movie The Shining. Stanley Kubrick made an amazing movie, and
Absolutely.
it may not be the greatest adaptation of the book, but it's a phenomenal movie. Everything about that movie just is amazing, from the acting to the score to, I mean, the direction, obviously. And
Yeah.
there's this documentary called Room 237, I think, that talks about like all the I mean, there's some conspiracy theories about The Shining out there, and they talk about some of that, but it's also just talks about, like, Kubrick was like kind of insane about detail,
Hmm.
and the hotel, like, there's physical, like, improv or physical impossibilities with the hotel. Like, there's,
Yeah.
when you first go to the I forget the manager's name, but when Jack is, like, kind of interviewing with the manager,
In the
there's a window
office.
behind his desk, but then, like, they leave the office and go around the corner or something, and there's no way that window could be there, type of thing.
Yeah.
It's nowadays we'd think those were goofs, but with Kubrick, there
That
that
was
was,
definitely on purpose.
that was so, yeah, definitely on purpose. And
Yeah.
so it just added, like, this element of kind of creepiness and uneasiness with the hotel, that there was these weird, nothing, it didn't make sense the way the building actually, it was impossible, basically.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, we could talk about The Shining for hours, probably. Uh, but yeah, Jack Nicholson and Jack Torrance, I do think, deserve a spot on the list of best movie villains of all time.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Um, Another thing that I find interesting about Jack Torrance is the effect that the hotel is having on him. Like you said, in The Shining, the movie, the hotel is a character in itself.
Hmm.
And going back to what I said about making that discovery of the true Jack Torrance, I think that um the hotel is the is the thing that's making that discovery.
Right.
It's uncovering who Jack really is, because it recognizes that thing that is off in him.
Right.
Because I know that I haven't read the book, but I think in the book that the hotel wants Danny's ability to shine. Is that correct?
It's been a while since I've read the book, but I believe that's yeah, I believe that's correct. I mean, it's
Okay.
yeah, uh I think so. It seems to kind of really want Danny, obviously,
Mhm.
and it starts to influence Jack in order to get to Danny. I think so. So I
Okay.
believe you're correct.
Okay. Yeah. So it the even though the hotel wants Danny, Jack is kind of like this bonus. It's like, oh, like what is
Right.
this? So the hotel knows that Jack Torrance is a bit off, maybe a little bit more than a bit, but the hotel recognized that and definitely exploits that, which I thought it was brilliant. Like you said, Stanley Kubrick, he I truly believe that he does understand what the essence of The Shining is, but he's such a visionary,
Right.
and he has such a unique mind, and he's so detail oriented that he saw it as an opportunity to make it something completely his own. And I think that
And he
the
did, yeah.
movie is it stands on its own as one of the greatest movies of all time. I know
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that would disagree with this. A lot of people do not like
Oh,
that
really?
movie, and I get it, because it's open to interpretation, and
Sure.
I don't think that he had set out to make a film that was concrete, as far as one specific theme or one specific message. There are multiple themes, there are multiple messages. You know, some people have taken those themes and turned them into conspiracy theories. I don't know if I believe those conspiracy theories, but it just goes to show the kind of mind that Stanley Kubrick had,
Yeah.
and the complexity and the nuance that he brought to an already complex story and an already complex character in uh in Jack Torrance. So I think that, not only is The Shining one of the greatest movies ever made, but Jack Torrance is one of the greatest, most complex villains that we've seen on screen.
Yeah. 100% agree with you. I don't think I could say anything else that you pretty much haven't said already that um it's interesting talking about Kubrick being a visionary, he's got such an interesting filmography and there's still quite a few movies of his I haven't seen yet.
Mhm.
But the ones I have seen, I mean, that's just you can't deny that he was one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived, really.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Um, I know that we had previously discussed the villains that we were going to talk about tonight, but I did add another one, and
Oh, okay.
our good buddy Emmett, he mentioned him, and he said, I know why the Joker is a perfect enemy for Batman, and that's who I want to talk about, is the Joker, specifically the Joker from The Dark Knight.
Yes.
Um, the Joker is obviously one of the greatest fictional characters ever created. Um, he is, the counterpart to one of the best, superheroes ever created, in my opinion. One of the most complex fictional characters ever created in any medium. Um, TV, movies, comics, radio, video games, whatever. Batman is that guy.
Right. Yeah.
And Joker is one of the greatest villains of all time. But in 2008, a little known director, known as Christopher Nolan. He he made this movie called Batman Begins in '05, and its sequel came out in 2008, named The Dark Knight, and he gave us one of the best representations of the Joker that has ever been, and that cannot go understated, because Heath Ledger, along with the story that Nolan and his writers came up with, that version of the Joker is absolutely incredible, because it showed us the Joker in a way we had never seen him before, and that's one of the great things about the Joker. The Joker is so complex that you can do a different version of the Joker every time and not repeat yourself.
Right. It's true.
Not many characters you can do that with.
No.
Um, I'm struggling to think of a second character that you can do that with. But yeah, the Joker is definitely someone who is different every time we see him on screen. But in 2008, when Heath Ledger gave us his version of the Joker, in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight, that was something to behold, because he gave us a complex Joker, obviously, but or a more complex Joker, but he gave us a Joker with um not necessarily a plan, but he had a point to prove.
Yes.
And a lot of people would say that he definitely proved this point, with Harvey Dent, because that story for the Dark Knight was based on it was based on a lot of things, but its main influence was the Long Halloween,
Right.
and the Killing Joke a little bit. And the thing that I found interesting about that was that his purpose was to show that anyone can, descend into madness after one bad day. And for, Harvey Dent, his one bad day was the death of Rachel Dawes.
Right.
And the Joker had, like I said, he had a very specific point that he wanted to get across. And that was, no one stays good forever. Even Harvey Dent said it himself, referring to Julius Caesar. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. To quote Blake Snyder, that is the theme stated.
Right. Sure.
The whole movie of the Dark Knight is about that. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And the Joker made sure that was carried out. So that's just one of the many things that I find interesting about Christopher Nolan and Heath Ledger's version of the Joker. How about you?
Yeah, no, you I mean, there was one point I was going to make was one of the best, it's towards the end of the movie, but one of my favorite scenes is Joker and Batman are fighting, and he's trying to prove to Batman that like you said, that people just need that, he even says it just takes a little push
Yeah.
to get people to become bad or whatever, and so when Batman throws him off the building, Joker is laughing the whole way down, because in his brain he thinks that was it. I just pushed Batman to his breaking point, and now he's killed me, and I've proved my point. But then
Yeah.
Batman catches him, and he's almost disappointed as he's getting pulled up, and he's like, oh, and he goes, "You won't kill me out of," I forget what he says, out of some self-righteous rule or whatever, and then he goes, "And I won't kill you because you're just too much
fun."
I remember when before the Dark Knight came out, I was, I was reading pretty much everything I could about interviews with Christopher Nolan and anything. I just
Mhm.
wanted to know anything I could about that movie. And he talked about how the Joker in that movie, they treated him like the shark from Jaws, where
Yeah.
he just pops up here and there, causes chaos, and kind of, you know, isn't necessary. He's not like, and I know this is a villain we're about to talk about, but he's not like Thanos. Like Infinity War is essentially a Thanos movie. It's like his
Yes.
movie.
Yes.
He's almost the main character. But in the Dark Knight, the Joker really is like the shark from Jaws. It's Batman's kind of going along his storyline, and then all of a sudden the Joker pops up and causes havoc and throws everything into a mess, and he's got to
Mhm.
kind of deal with that and everything. And he, this is a character that you don't find necessarily very empathetic, or at least I don't, but
No.
he's so much fun to watch,
Yeah.
and so same thing with Jack Nicholson's Joker, another Jack Nicholson performance. It's not the Dark Knight, but it's
Mhm.
his Joker was just so much fun to watch as well.
Mhm.
And he was and maybe I don't know what it is, if it's just somebody who kind of, maybe it's kind of a subconscious thing in all of us, where we just kind of enjoy watching somebody who just is like, you know what, screw the system. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
just do whatever, and stick it to the man. I don't know, um but yeah, I was thinking about it today, actually, not to bring us down, but tomorrow, January 22nd, will be the 15th anniversary of Heath Ledger's passing.
Mhm.
And I cannot believe it has been 15 years already. In July, the Dark Knight will turn 15 years old.
Wow.
It's nuts to me that, I mean, time flies, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that's crazy to think. I remember the day that I found out that he had passed. I was at work, and I was in disbelief. I was like, man, like he won't even get to see
I
uh
know.
his finished product. And it's unfortunate, but he gave us one of the greatest cinematic villains to ever grace the screen. Like you said, the thing that you know made him, or one of the things that made his version of the Joker interesting, and Jack Nicholson, is that they were, they really understood that the Joker was an agent of chaos
Mhm.
and anarchy, and did not play by the rules
Right.
whatsoever. And that makes him, uh you see a glimmer of relatability in that, because there are plenty of times, or plenty of people that have had a moment of not wanting to play by the rules, and just
Mhm.
just wanting to go crazy. And Heath Ledger's Joker says that his point of view is that it's all a facade. The only true order is no order. The only true, the only true way to live is without order, without rules. um and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but the way he presents it is understandable.
Right.
Like you
Yeah.
said, all it takes is one bad day. Like, we're all going through life just trying to keep it together, and all it takes is the wrong thing to happen at the right time, and the downward spiral begins. So some of us are a hair away from that downward spiral, and it's scary to think about.
Mhm.
But it's real. And he presented that in such a compelling way. So yeah, again, Joker, one of the greatest to ever do it.
Yeah, and his unpredictability, one of those things you were talking about, is the agent of chaos. His unpredictability is also, I think, really fun to watch because you never know if he's actually going to kill somebody or if he's just going to, and they don't do this in the live action movies so much, but you never know if he's going to kill somebody, if he's going to pull the trigger on that gun and it's going to have the little flag that pops out that says, bang or whatever. And they do that a little bit in the opening scene of The Dark Knight. He puts that grenade in the guy's mouth and ends up just being a smoke bomb. And you think he's going to, think he's going to die, but he realizes that he so you never know with the Joker. It's just however he's feeling that day, which is terrifying, but also incredibly fun to watch.
Yeah.
And Heath Ledger, before the movie came out and when Heath Ledger was first cast, before we probably saw any footage, people were thinking like, how can you top Jack Nicholson? Because Jack Nicholson, nobody had played the Joker live action anyway. Mark Hamill was doing a pretty darn good job on the animated series, but nobody had played.
He did all right.
Yeah, he did all right. Nobody had played a live action Joker for almost 20 years before the movie came out. And Heath Ledger basically said, "Hold my beer," and just killed it. And now we're thinking, we've seen a couple of versions of the Joker since then with Jared Leto and Barry Keoghan or Kogan, however you say his name, from the Batman. But I don't know if it's one of those things now where I'm thinking, who can ever top Heath Ledger? Because he just set the bar so high.
Yeah.
To tell my little story, I was in a movie actually when I found out that he died. I had seen two movies that day. First, I saw The Bucket List, which is that Jack Nicholson, Morgan Freeman movie. And then I saw Walk Hard first. Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. You remember that movie?
Yeah.
And then I was in The Bucket List, watching The Bucket List, and my phone started going off. And I don't, back then I didn't have a smartphone yet. And I tried not to check my phone in the movie theater, but it kept buzzing. And so I was like, all right, somebody's trying to get in touch with me. And so I look at it, and the first text I saw was from a friend that just said, "Ledger's dead, dude." And I was like, what? And so then I'm kind of like secretly trying to look through, and I had another text from another friend that said Heath Ledger died. And I don't even remember the second half of that movie because like the whole time I was just sitting there the whole time being like, what?
Yeah, he's just in disbelief.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that was a crazy day. Because the last thing you expected was that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But and I agree. I'm hoping because that trailer came out in December, and so he didn't get to he probably didn't get to see the final product, but I hope he got to see that trailer, and just hopefully he was like, all right, Chris is doing a good job here.
Right.
But yeah.
But yeah, like I said, he understood the assignment, and he definitely gave us
got an A+ on that assignment.
Yeah, A+. He definitely gave us one of the greatest versions of any character ever. So
yeah.
Really quick before we move into our final villain, I want to touch on someone that Emmett mentioned, and that was Lex Luthor.
Oh yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna let you run point on this one since you are the Superman super fan.
Lex Luthor. So Lex Luthor can be a wide variety of types of villains. I think he can be the sympathetic, empathetic type villain that we talked about, especially when you watch Smallville.
Yes,
Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor,
phenomenal.
He's amazing, and it's one of those things where you don't want him to go bad. He's already a little bad, he's got, even from the very first season, he's got secrets that he's keeping from Clark, trying to figure out what happened with the car wreck and trying to figure out, where this will, he's got that like key to the spaceship, and he knows it's, not made from any metal on Earth and everything. So there are these secrets that he's kind of keeping from Clark, but for the most part, he's not like that bad of a guy. He actually does a lot of really good things for the Kents and for Smallville throughout that first season. And so, and Michael Rosenbaum is just so much fun to watch that you really don't want him to become this bad guy. That Clark and Lex are going to have a falling out eventually, and Superman and Lex are going to be arch enemies, and you almost don't want it because he's just so likable on that show.
Yeah.
And then you've got Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, who is a little different than he is in the comics. You know, he's a lot of times when we think of Lex Luthor, we think of the kind of billionaire type businessman who owns you know, all like tons of different companies and has his
Mhm.
hand in all these different kind of scientific, you know, research projects and things like that. And Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor was living in like an abandoned subway, you know, station. It really doesn't have a whole lot of money. Considers himself the world's greatest criminal mind, but like nobody really knows who he is, type of thing. And he's also you know, he's self-conscious about his baldness. He's always wearing different wigs throughout the
Mhm.
movie, and so Gene Hackman does a great job with Lex Luthor. I really liked Kevin Spacey's portrayal, which is a little bit of a continuation of Gene Hackman's version, because he actually is broke at the beginning of Superman Returns, and he cons an old woman out of her money as she's
Mhm.
dying on her deathbed. And so then he gets to like keep her house and her yacht and all that stuff. So he kind of
Mhm.
has that rich man feel in Superman Returns. And he at least embraces his baldness in that movie too, which is good.
Yeah.
But but no, Lex Luthor I think is a fantastic villain, and done right can be very complex and have a lot of that nuance. I mean, we were just talking about it, the episode hasn't come out yet, but you and I were discussing All-Star Superman a couple weeks ago, and
Mhm.
Anthony LaPaglia's performance of that character and the way that character is written
Oh,
for that
yeah.
storyline is just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his motivation and everything, again, while may not agree with it, is totally understandable. And yeah, I just I don't know. What do you think about Lex Luthor? I don't know. Kind of feel like
No,
I'm
I mean,
rambling.
I agree with pretty much everything that you've said. As far as live action goes, my favorite version is Michael Rosenbaum,
Yeah,
because he's so complex and relatable. He is easily the most empathetic Lex Luthor that we
yeah,
have seen thus far.
definitely.
I think a close second would be Kevin Spacey's version, because he is a continuation of Gene Hackman, who is not my favorite, but um, what he does with his version of Lex Luthor is, he takes Gene Hackman's version, um, and he makes it his own. I never felt like I was watching Kevin Spacey do a
Gene
Gene
Hackman. You're right.
Hackman
Yeah,
impression. He was his own Lex Luthor. He just had Gene Hackman's lore backing him up.
yeah,
Which I thought was brilliant, and his version of Lex Luthor was a more traditional version of Lex Luthor, something that we were used to seeing. The thing about those two versions, Gene Hackman and Kevin Spacey, those versions of Lex were like, they were intelligent, but they were more fixated on real estate
right,
rather than uh the actual, like, money or
right.
or sticking it to Superman for the sake of sticking it to Superman.
Yeah,
They were, they were more about getting as much land as they could, and Superman just happened to keep getting in the way of that.
right. Well,
Um,
also I would say the power that comes with the land, because they
yes.
they kind of both realize that if they control this portion of the land or whatever, or,
Mhm,
like in Superman Returns, the new Krypton or whatever they call it that he kind of was going to create was going to take it was going to put like most of the eastern part of the US underwater.
mhm,
And so he was going to kind of be it was going to be almost like a kind of a ransom type thing, where he's
yeah,
like, well, you got to do what I say or I'll put your states underwater, like that's or something. And it was kind of similar in the original Superman with Gene Hackman. He was going to send a rocket into California and knock California into the water. And
yeah,
so it was, I think Lex Luthor is very concerned, very his desire is power.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that he hates about Superman, is because Superman is so powerful, and it just drives him crazy
Oh,
because
naturally powerful.
yeah, naturally powerful. And it just drives the man nuts because wants all that power, and this guy just comes along and has it, and everybody loves him, and it's just it just yeah, it kills him.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um but yeah, they are very much, I remember the line in the movie, it says uh invest in land because it's the one thing they're not making anymore. And
Yep.
so their motivation, their plans in the movies are kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Um but at least it's not just somebody trying to go for a lot of money, I guess it's
Right.
kind of but yeah. Sorry.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. If you have the land, you have the power. So it
Right.
definitely makes sense. So but I again, my favorite types of villains are the ones that are empathetic and relatable. And I think one of the best versions of Lex Luthor is in it's a graphic novel. I think the graphic novel is just called Lex Luthor. But it is a fantastic story. Superman is nowhere to be found in the graphic novel, but it is so good because it presents Lex Luthor as a philanthropist and someone who is generally liked by the public.
Hmm.
Um, and I just the way that the writers handle that, I can't remember who wrote it, but the way that they handle that is just so brilliant. They almost have you rooting for Lex Luthor.
Hmm.
And without getting into any spoilers, he does have this plan that is very Lex Luthor like, but because the writers do such an amazing job making you like this version of Lex Luthor, it just creates a very emotionally complex story.
Hmm.
I'm really upset with myself for not remembering who wrote the story, but it's brilliant, and I know I have it uh, here behind me, but I don't want to look for it right now. But even though I'm tempted to, but
I don't know who
but
wrote it
yeah,
either, but I feel like I can see the cover. I never read it, but you're
yes,
making
it's
me
it's
want to read
black
it.
and white with red
Yeah.
red letters. Yeah, it's a phenomenal story. But yeah, that's one of my favorite versions of Lex Luthor because again, he is so emotionally complex and very, very, very relatable. Um, but really quick, I do want to move right into our final villain, which is Thanos, particularly the MCU version of Thanos. Josh Brolin did a fantastic job with his version of Thanos, and I said this ever since Infinity War came out. His version of Thanos rivals Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight. It is that good. There's a reason why Thanos is the greatest villain in the MCU. Going back to what you said about Infinity War, it's basically Thanos's movie. He is the
Hmm.
main character of that movie. It's pretty much a heist movie, but it's a heist movie that not only has physical external stakes, but it has emotional stakes as well. Emotional stakes for not only the Avengers and the inhabitants of the universe, but emotional stakes for Thanos. And they do a fantastic job writing Thanos and making you not only understand his logic, but feel sorry for him at certain points in the story. And it's brilliant. Stephen McFeely and Christopher Marcus, they do a phenomenal job with the writing of
Yeah.
Thanos.
Yeah, I agree. He's one of the most like I was actually watching Infinity War the other day, and his talk about balance and bringing kind of balance to the universe. It's one of those things where we know he's wrong. Like what he's doing is wrong,
Mhm.
but at the same time, you kind of understand why he's doing what he's doing.
Mhm.
And like his plan kind of makes sense, even though it's wrong, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, he is one of the best. He's one of the best villains of the MCU, but he's also one of the best kind of. I think he'll go down as one of the best villains of in movie history.
Absolutely.
Because of, like you said, he's written so well. His motivations are so clear. He's I feel like he's somewhat empathetic as well, or we can empathize, I guess you could say, with him.
Mhm.
Um, his performance is amazing.
Mhm.
There was something else I was going to say about him, and now I can't remember what it is. But yeah, yeah, he's just he's a really good villain. He's very
His
powerful,
version.
obviously, in order to go up against the Avengers. I remember
Yeah.
when that movie starts and Loki says, "We have a Hulk," and you see him. At first, you think, "Okay, that's pretty cool," but then he starts holding his own against the Hulk, and you're like, "Oh,
Oh.
this guy is pretty powerful." And
Yeah.
that's without all 6 stones. He only had 1 at that point.
He wasn't even using a stone.
Right,
He
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 wasn't.
he
Yeah,
had the stone and wasn't using it.
yeah. So, but yeah, Josh Brolin's performance is fantastic. I think you should have gone for the head. Will probably go down as like, the AFI. I don't know if they will. They might be a little snobbish, kind of like the Oscars, where they don't really include superhero movies. But I wouldn't be surprised if that eventually makes its way onto like AFI's top 100 movie lines of all time. You should have gone for the head.
I think they did include Heath Ledger's Dark Knight in
Oh, that's
100
good.
movies, 100 villains.
Nice.
Um, I think so.
Some of the
Uh,
lists I looked at definitely had Joker on it. Like Joker usually was number 2.
yeah,
And Thanos was on a couple of lists I looked at. So I really do, I mean, uh, people agree with us
yeah,
that
for sure.
Thanos is one of the, not only just one of the best MCU villains, but one of the greatest movie villains. And one of the things I love about the movie is that he achieves his plan. It's like he actually
Yes,
doesn't get defeated in Infinity War.
yes.
So
The heroes
uh
lose, which I
right.
which I was like, man, the Marvel Disney they had some balls.
And I love too, like again, talking about how it's kind of his movie. That movie ends with him. The last shot is him on whatever planet that is, I forget. And he's
He's
just
in the
kind of looking at
garden.
the, say what?
He's in the garden.
Yeah, he's in the garden, he's kind of watching the sunset or whatever, and just kind of has like a breath of relief or whatever,
Yeah.
and then it just fades to black. And I remember people in my theater going, "What?" Like they were just like you know? They're like,
Yeah,
"Are you
for
kidding
sure.
me?"
For sure, for sure. More than a special guest. What's going on, man? He brings up a point. He says that Thanos had 10 years to build up.
That's true.
Yes and no.
Right.
S- Um, so Thanos, we knew Thanos was coming, 10 years before he did, but the version of Thanos that we had seen before Infinity War is a completely different iteration than what we got in the final product. The first time we saw him was at the mid-credit scene for
Avengers.
Avengers, and he didn't have any speaking roles or
He
like, any
just
speaking lines.
he just
And
smiled.
then yeah, and then the second time we saw him was in Guardians of the Galaxy in a brief like 2-minute scene.
Right.
And in that scene, he's a lot more like what Jerry Jenkins would say. He was kind of melodramatic. He was the twirling of the mustache type villain. Um, even in the post credit scene for what
Age of
is it?
Ultron?
Age of Ultron? Yeah, Age of
Voice is
Ultron.
fine. I'll do it
Yeah, I'll do
myself.
it myself. Even that was a little bit of the twirling
Yeah,
mustache.
yeah.
But when we finally got to Infinity War, he he was a completely different person.
Yeah.
He was so much more empathetic. He was so much more emotional. He was so much more human. And they understood that for this to work, in order for him to feel like uh in order for him to feel even more of a threat, because his presence was looming over
Yeah.
the course of the MCU, specifically in phases 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So his presence was definitely looming for sure. But in order for him to feel like an imminent threat in Infinity War and Endgame, they had to make a significant change to his character, as far as what we had seen before in the MCU and what we had seen in the source material in the comics, because he's not like that in the comics. I'll definitely say that the movie version, at least for me, the movie version
Improved.
of Thanos is definitely better than the comic version of Thanos, in my opinion. I hate to say this, but I kind of want more because he's so good. But
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want the MCU to move backwards. They've been doing
Right.
that enough lately tonally, but that's for another podcast. But again, they made the choice to change him from the inside out, and just humanize him more, make him more empathetic, and they gave him a reason to execute his plan and to snap away half the universe. It was because the universe was overpopulated and the resources were finite.
Right.
And I see a lot of people say, well, why didn't he just double the resources? Because he didn't double the resources because that would have doubled the population. The population was already was already oversaturated, overpopulated. There were too many people in the universe. So you know if he doubled more of the resources, that would in turn increase the population. So he did what he thought was the best thing to do, and that was a universe wide genocide. And he said it was random, it was dispassionate, in his eyes it was fair. And to an extent, he's right. When it's random and
Right.
dispassionate, it is
Right.
fair. But at the same time, you cannot kill half the
Right.
universe. And another thing that made him interesting is that at the beginning of Endgame, he used the stones to destroy the stones. For him, it was not about power.
Right.
At least at the beginning of that movie. The 2014 version of Thanos showed up in Endgame, and he was a bit more ruthless and angry, and what's the word that I'm looking for? Arrogant. He was definitely a more arrogant version of Thanos. But the Infinity War version of Thanos is just he's incredibly powerful, but he is incredibly empathetic. Um and he is one of few villains where their 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 empathetic nature, their sympathy matches their power.
Hmm.
And would that's just something that just makes him incredibly relatable and incredibly complex. And like you said, he will go down as one of the greatest movie villains, regardless of genre, one of the greatest movie villains of all time.
Yeah, I really think so. I agree. You reminded me of somebody as you were talking about Thanos and his plan and his motivation. You reminded me of another villain that I like. Not as good as Thanos, but General Zod from Man of Steel.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
has kind of a similar motivation. Oops. His whole thing is trying to find a new home for Krypton and continue the Kryptonian race.
Mhm.
And so again, a very understandable plan, just going
Mhm.
about it the wrong way.
Yeah.
Destroying Earth to, wipe out the Earth's population so that Krypton can survive is a little misguided. But that speech he gives after they kind of send the ship, I think it's into like the Phantom Zone, and
Yeah.
he gives that speech to Superman where he's got like the dust in his hand, and he's like, "That
Mhm.
is what you have taken from me." Like that is
Yeah.
that I love that speech. That's
Yeah,
Michael Shannon kills it in
yeah,
that scene.
yeah, he was talking about, uh, my purpose
Yeah.
is to protect my people, and
Right.
now I have
Yeah.
no people.
Yeah.
That
So
is what you have taken from me.
yeah. Michael
Yeah.
Shannon, man, when he was cast as that, I was like, that is awesome. Because
Yo,
I think,
everybody said the same thing.
yeah, Michael Shannon is such a good actor, and to have him be the villain in a Superman movie, I was pumped.
Yeah, yeah, everybody was pumped. Um, yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. I wish we could talk about him a little bit more, but
Yeah, we
we
got to
got to
get into
start
draft
wrapping
time.
it up.
Yeah,
Yeah, got to start getting into draft time. One of my favorite part of the night.
yeah, me too, man.
Um,
I love draft time.
yeah, I love draft time. But is there? Do you have any closing thoughts on what makes great villains?
I don't know if I have any closing thoughts on what makes great villains, but I will say great villains tend to make for really good movies.
Absolutely, they
I
make the
think
movie.
I think your hero can only be as strong. I mean, it sounds a little cliche to say, but I think like your hero can only be as good as your villain. I mean,
Agreed.
there's plenty of movies that have really kind of interesting main characters, but the villains just aren't that great. For example, another movie we talked about recently,
Half
even
the
though the
MCU, but
well,
that's another
yeah, that's true. But I was thinking about I was thinking about a movie that you and I talked about again recently. The episode will come out in a couple weeks called The Crow. The Crow, Brandon Lee's Eric Draven, is that his name? I think it is.
Yes.
His character is very interesting, but the villain in that movie is just very one-dimensional, not very interesting,
Yeah.
and kind of hurts the movie in my opinion. And so, um, yeah, I think when you have really strong villains like Thanos or the Joker or something, it just makes the movie that much better.
Agreed. Agreed. Um, well, yeah, that was a great conversation. But moving right along into draft time, the featured draft pool tonight is non-fantasy villains. So we will not be choosing Darth Vader or
Or the
Emmett just
Joker.
mentioned
Yeah.
Sauron or Saruman. We will not be mentioning those. Um, but
Because
we
otherwise our
will.
list would just be superhero villains for the
Yeah,
whole thing, right?
they would just be super villains. So we're gonna leave super villains out of it. We're gonna leave fantasy villains out of it. We're just gonna go with straight, just regular, uh, regular villains, grounded villains for the most part.
Grounded villains.
I believe you go first this week.
Okay. All right.
I think.
Well,
Yeah.
I can't help but think this is probably on your list. But I'm gonna take it off your list and say that my number one choice is Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. Anthony Hopkins.
Oh, I don't like you. I don't like you right now. That's a great choice. That's a
Yeah.
great choice. I am going to pick someone that I know for a fact is on your list because it's one of your
Okay.
favorite movies, and I'm that kind of person. So, uh, you said yours was Hannibal Lecter.
Yes. I have a feeling I know who you're gonna say, and I'm interested to well, we'll see. Let's see what you say.
I'm going to go with Norman Bates.
Yeah, that's who I thought you were gonna say. And you know what? Norman is actually not on my list because and maybe this is a bit psycho of me, but I don't really see him as a villain. I know he is. He's like he kills
He
people and everything in that
definitely
movie.
is.
But I don't I when he was on some villain list, and I was like, Norman, really? So yeah, I don't know. I just love Norman Bates, so I guess uh I didn't put him on my list because but that is a good choice, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Um,
you had a good one too, so I had to follow up with another heavy hitter. So
that is, yeah, excellent choice. My number 2 is Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men, played by Javier Bardem.
man, I well, I'm
So I got
so mad.
got Hannibal and Anton in my corner here.
Oh man, I'm so upset. Oh man, that's a great choice. I don't know if I could follow that up.
Oh, sure you can. Sure you can.
Oh man, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Um, I'm gonna go with the shark from Jaws.
Nice. Nice. That is a good choice too.
Yeah, the shark from Jaws. A very he is the quintessential force of nature
Yes.
villain.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. Bruce is what they called him on set, I guess. I don't know why,
Bruce, yeah.
but Bruce the shark, yeah. Let's see. Do I want to do I think I will. My number 3, Hans Gruber from Die
Woo! I knew that was coming.
Hard.
I knew that was coming.
Hans Gruber.
Um, huh. I am going to pick. Okay, now I haven't seen this movie.
Oh, interesting.
However, um, I do think that from what I know and from what I've read about the villain, he's a great villain, and at some point he does become aware that he is the villain,
Right.
and I don't know how to spell or say his name, but it's the villain from Les Mis.
Javert.
Javert, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, Javert. Very good choice.
Javert.
A lot of people gave Russell. So I know you haven't seen the musical version. There is a non-musical version of Les Mis you could watch, and Javert is played by Jeffrey Rush in that version. It's Liam Neeson plays Jean Valjean, and it's pretty good.
Was that in the 90s?
Yes, I want to say it was in
Okay,
the late 90s.
late 90s. Okay.
But in the musical version with Hugh Jackman, Russell Crowe plays Javert. And a lot of people gave Russell Crowe some crap for his singing. I never had a problem with it. He's not
Hmm.
as strong of a singer as some of the other actors, but I don't think he's a
Jack.
bad singer necessarily.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think he played Javert very well in that movie. Um, so yeah, that's a great choice. Javert's a great villain too, because again, he's the law. He's actually technically like the good guy,
Yeah.
but we also know that Jean Valjean is a good person, and was spent he got thrown in jail for 19 years for stealing bread for like his wife's or not his wife, his sister's kid, because they were starving, and ended up, he's in the songs they say, 5 years for what you did, the rest because you tried to run. So he tried to escape a couple times and ended up spending 19 years in prison.
Hmm.
And long story short, Javert is like hunting him down the whole movie because he's essentially, they didn't have like parole back then, but he essentially kind of skipped town and kind of came up with a new identity and everything. And so
Hmm.
he, he could go back to jail essentially. And so Javert's hunting him down, and uh we understand his motivation. He's trying to right a wrong, but at the same time he's just he's so blinded. Everything's black and white to him. There's good and bad. There's the right and wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's just he's a good he's a good choice. That is a great villain. You should watch that movie.
Thank you, thank you. I will. I'm gonna watch the non-musical version
You
because
should, yeah.
I can't
I
do
know.
Round 4.
Number 4 for me is a choice or is a pick you might not expect. But I think she's an amazing movie villain, and that is Annie Wilkes from Misery, played by Kathy Bates.
Ooh, fire choice. Fire choice. Kathy Bates, man.
Another Stephen King villain. But yeah, I think she's amazing in that movie.
She is amazing. Absolutely. Absolutely. My number 4, I'm gonna go with Calvin Candy from Django Unchained.
Nice. I wondered if you would choose him.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio knocks it out of the park is an understatement.
Yeah.
He knocks it out of the stratosphere with Calvin Candy, especially that dinner scene at Candyland. It is,
yeah.
Whew, the last time I watched that movie and saw that scene, I got chills.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic villain.
He was nominated for that movie, right? He just didn't win. Leonardo, I think he was.
Was he?
Christoph Waltz won for Django.
Yes,
but I can't remember if Leo was nominated. If he wasn't nominated, that's a crime. But I think he was.
I mean, that role rivals Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah,
like it is so he does an incredible job.
Yeah,
as Calvin Candy. He is so menacing, and his charisma is infectious.
For my final choice, you can tell me if this is cheating and counts as a fantasy villain. If it does, I'll change it. But I'm going with Biff Tannen from the Back to the Future trilogy.
I'll allow it.
Okay.
I'll allow it. Because although that is a science fiction fantasy movie,
yeah,
Biff Tannen does not possess any supernatural powers.
Right.
So. None that we can tell. So.
Right, exactly.
Good choice.
Thank you.
I guess this could be considered a little bit of a cheat, but I'm going with the first version of him before they get into ridiculousness, and that is Michael Myers.
Yes, he was on my. I made a list of like 12 villains.
Yeah,
he was on there, and I almost put him on my list, but yeah.
I'm gonna go with Michael Myers, another kind of like force of nature type villain. He was just relentless and unstoppable.
Right.
But like I said, I went with the first version of him before they established that he was some kind of
before he basically becomes superhuman. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we got some solid choices, man. Non-fantasy villains. You've got Hannibal Lecter, Anton Chigurh, Hans Gruber, Annie Wilkes, and Biff Tannen. I have Norman Bates, the shark from Jaws, Javert, Calvin Candy, and Michael Myers. I think we got another wash, man.
Yeah, I do too. Actually. That's a really, if I was having to vote, it's a really hard choice.
That's a tough choice. That's a tough choice, man. But shout out to us. We made some great choices. Tonight was a phenomenal episode. I know when I go to edit this episode for the audio version, I'm probably not going to cut much out. Because we just, like I said, this is a great episode. We had a great topic that kind of piggybacked off of last week's topic. So again, this was phenomenal. I had a great time, and we had a really good draft time. So we're gonna go ahead and get out of here. You can follow me on TikTok, Twitch, Instagram, and YouTube at Studio_Media, and you can follow Justin Speck at Cinema Heroes on Instagram and YouTube. Please check out the Cinema Heroes podcast, where Justin and I and our friend John, we do superheroes movies and superhero movies reviews. So definitely check that out. We got some great episodes in the can. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And don't forget, this is a part of the Cultured Nerd Podcast Network. So go check out that Cultured Nerd podcast. The link to all of our social medias and all of our podcasts is in the description. So please go check that out. If you are watching this, thanks for watching. If you're listening, thank you for listening. Also, rate it and write a review because it helps out the podcast tremendously. We definitely want to hear some feedback from you guys. So please rate and review so we can hear back from you guys. But we're gonna go ahead and get out of here. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. But in the meantime, we are going to go watch some more movies. Peace.
What am I doing here by myself?